Hey guys, today we'll just be talking about how to answer circuit debate arguments. This is presented by both Nina and Fiona.
Hi guys.
Okay, so first, we're gonna be going over two things today. So first thing is just general answers, so how to respond to circuit arguments in general, and then we're gonna be going over how to make an actual block file, so how you format blocks and what blocks to include. So here is a list of debate jargon used in this lecture. So from the previous slide, you might be wondering what AT is. That means answer to, which is a refutation to an argument. Sometimes you'll see some people write it as A2 because it's answer to. But if you hear me say AT, that just means we're answering an argument like a refutation. A block or a block file is just refutation or refutation file. And these three symbols down here, DL, NU, LT, are just abbreviations for common responses like D-link, non-unique, link turn. Okay, so first, how to respond to circuit arguments in general. So first, you have to understand the circuit, the structure of a circuit argument. So just think of circuit arguments as normal arguments, but slightly wackier slash more unconventional. And the fundamental parts are still the same. It's still uniqueness, link, and impact, but the impact is often extinction or something that's like really like outlandish. Common areas that circuit people use to write their points about include climate change, China, Russia, US hegemony and war, hegemony is power, proliferation scenarios like nuke war, farming, so like famines and different farm bills, tech race, which is basically which two countries can outcompete each other based on like how many innovations they make, how good their like technology is, and finally elections, which is basically saying that like because this bill is passed, we're gonna see like so and so electoral candidate win, and that's bad or good because of XYZ. So honestly, like as you do more circuit debate and go to more tournaments, you'll realize that circuit arguments all follow like a very similar structure. So if you want to get familiar right now, just go onto like well-known circuit schools open case lists, such as like Peninsula, um, what else? Peninsula, Immaculate Heart. There's also like a bunch of schools in like Texas and Florida that have this too, such as Lake Highland Prep. And you should read cases on there to familiarize yourself with the variety of contentions that circuit people run, because like honestly, they just all follow like all of these like scenarios.
Yeah, also just one quick bit. I think it's also really important to know that open cases also has a lot of access to like knowing the structure of how they're debating as well with their arguments and learning to be able to adapt through open case list.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on. So, here are some ways you can refute circuit people's cases. So this also applies to trad debate too, but you want to be especially careful when you're doing a circuit debate because even one drop can screw you up because they will catch it. So first, non-unique. Their problem is already going to be solved, basically. So for example, if the affirmative says, let's do living wage because it helps decrease the gender pay gap, you as the negation can say the gender pay gap is already decreasing, so there's like no point in even doing the affirmative. And you often have to pair this with like other refutations because as a standalone contention, like they can just say we're achieving it quicker. So for example, for the living wage example, the app can just respond by saying that, okay, we're decreasing the gender pickup right now in the status quo, but if we do a living wage, it will happen quicker. So non-unique arguments are good, but they're not perfect on their own. And also, just a quick note over here, always bring up drops. If your opponent drops an argument, make sure to bring that up. Um, and like extend it fully because that's like that applies to like every single type of argument, non-unique, links and like impacts and all that. Okay. Next is delinking and link turns. So delinking is just explaining why their link is wrong or like their logic chain. So here's like a strategy that you use in like circuit debate if you're a traditional debater who doesn't spread against the spreader. You want to delink from the top. And that basically means that like they have this long link chain. And if you notice, if you like read through the case and you realize that all the links depend on like an initial link being true, all you have to do to win their argument over is to delink the first link. What you essentially do by doing that is you can kind of like ignore the other cards if you're running out of time because you've already gotten rid of like the first link in the total link chain. So this is like a very efficient strategy if your opponent reads a lot of cards and they're spreading. Also, you can do like evidence delinking or evidence comparison. So basically you're asking yourself while you're reading their evidence, is their card good or bad? Is there like author is like the author like not really credible? So for example, is it just like a blog writer versus like an actual researcher? Is the source biased? Is it from like a very right-leaning or left-leaning site? Or is the card like does it like have any recency or is it like recent at all? For example, if you're running like an elections disad, you want your cards to be very recent, or else like even like a few weeks or even months of time difference can create like a world of difference in articles. So those are ways you can delink your opponent's arguments. Also, there's this thing called link turn, where basically you're explaining why their link is actually good or bad, or just like opposite of what they say initially. So they initially say that their link is like a good thing, and you say actually no, it's a bad thing. If they say initially it's a bad thing, you say no, it's actually a good thing. For example, living wage. If app says living wage boosts consumer spending, which helps the economy, Ned can say no, turn. Boosting consumer spending is actually bad for the economy because it triggers inflation. So you see how you like take a link and you basically say no, it's like the opposite of what the opponent intended it to be. That's what a link turn is. And finally, an important strategy to use in circuit debate is always impact defense. So, for a quick recap, if you don't know already, defense is an argument about how the opponent is wrong, and this is different from offense because it doesn't explain why your side is necessarily better, it just says that they're wrong. Therefore, impact defense is their impact is wrong. And usually this is paired with like D-links and other refutations, but it can be a last-ditch attempt at refuting a person's argument if you already have like no if you actually have like no clue about what their contention is about because it's just like so wacky. So honestly, like when in doubt, impact defense. Here's an example of an impact defense. So for example, if your opponent mentioned that US Civil War will happen, it doesn't matter like what the link is they had to get to this conclusion. You just read this card saying that there's no US Civil War, and then it will just take out basically their like impact that like US Civil War will happen and it'll be bad. Because you essentially say it won't happen. So notice how like even though I read this card, I didn't actually respond to other links or like uniquenesses that lead to this evidence or like this impact. All you're doing is just saying that the impact won't happen. So that's why it's kind of like a last ditch attempt and should be paired with other responses because by itself, it doesn't really do much. Okay, cool. And then finally, here's a quick warning. Do not double turn yourself. So there's a difference between double blocking and double turning. So basically double turning is just like doing a link turn and also an impact turn at the same time. For example, if Neg says that the AF plan will collapse the economy and that econ collapse causes nuke war, you as the affirmative make a double turn mistake and you say turn. AF plan actually prevents economic collapse, but also turn economic collapse actually prevents nuke war. So in this scenario, you basically just conceded that like your plan is going to prevent economic collapse, but also if you prevent economic collapse, that leads to nuke war. So now affirming now causes nuke war and you kind of screwed yourself over. So make sure to not do that. And so when you're reading your like responses, read them smartly. Either do a link turn or an impact turn. Do not do both. However, there's this thing called like double blocking, where it's basically saying that like, okay, we have this response, but even if you don't buy that response, you can buy this alternative response. That's different from double turning because they inherently don't contradict like each other. And like if you're, for example, doing like LD debate, what you can do for double blocking is double block the framework. So for example, they have a point and you say, okay, under our structural violence framework, this is so it's like this point is wrong because blah 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 blah. But even if you don't buy the structural violence framing, we also win under their framework of utilitarianism or whatever the framework is, because this point is still wrong under util because of XYZ. So as you can see, you're double blocking because it's like if the judge doesn't buy one thing, they can buy this other thing. You give the judge options, so it makes you sound like stronger.
Okay, cool. The last step is to actually check their evidence. So this is one of the evidences that was brought up during a really like pretty high level round, and we essentially had this team go talk about how instability goes into the war. And when you're looking through the evidence, it usually seems fine if you skim through it, but you actually have to read through every single bit that's like not highlighted as well. Because if you like, you might think like, oh, chill, that's so fine. Like instability goes to nuclear. But the evidence is explicit, like this is not to say that Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran would actually eschew future opportunities. So this means that even when they have a lot of like links and a lot of impacts, to actually check if each evidence is actually saying what they're saying, because there's a thing called abusive card cutting where they're not actually representing what's actually said in the card. So make sure to actually check.
Yeah, so don't just buy like the tag, make sure to read the card. I know it goes by really quickly in circuit debate, but if there's like one card where you're just like, okay, if that card was like not true, I'd like win that entire side over, make sure to read that card very, very well. Even if it's not such like an abusive card cutting like this scenario, there's still gonna be something wrong about that card in some way. Maybe their methodology was bad, maybe the author is bad, etc. You want to check and like be really sure that this card is like good or bad before you actually refute it. Moving on. Making a block file. So we're going to go over how to format your blocks and what blocks to include. So first, a block file should have responses to all your stock arguments. Stock just means like very typical arguments that you see a lot when you're debating the topic. Covering niche arguments is good too, but it can take a lot of time. So if you don't have like the time commitment, you can always like respond to niche arguments in round like on the fly if you're good at thinking like on your toes, but definitely in your block file have blocks against all stock arguments. And also analytics are recommended. So analytics are basically just like sentences that don't have cards behind them explaining why the other person's side is wrong. So this is like all to say that like your responses don't have to be carded necessarily all the time because first, cards take a long time to read, so you'll be wasting a lot of time. But second, if you already have like a really, really good case, there's really no reason to read like a whole new card that says the exact same thing. Just reference the fact that like you already read a card that says this exact same thing back in your case and how that card is like really good. And usually when you're formatting your responses, you want to format it to be analytics first and then cards, like new response cards. Because if you're like running short on time, it's always good to reference like shorter analytic responses than to like read long, like really, really long cards.
Yeah. Also, an example of an analytic is that when oftentimes people want like run pandemics or something like a really big impact, you can read the double bind that says like, oh, like you can't have a pandemic that both spread fast and also kill easily. This kind of like circumvents the like whole thing about like pandemics leading to extinction. But like that's like a one sentence response that would be super efficient if you have a lot of stuff that you have to also get through.
Right, so like as you can see from Fiona's example, like low-key sometimes they just have like logical errors in their like arguments, and you could just point that out without having like an actual card behind it because it's logical. And okay, here are some extra tips that you can use to make your block file like really, really nice. So first thing is you can make long and short versions of common refutations. For example, if there's like a really common economic like disad on this topic, what you can do is you can create a long refutation example or like form like a long refutation with like 7 responses and also a short version with like 3 responses. And usually you'd use the short response if they don't spend like that much time talking about the econ disad or you're just like running short on time. And second, use abbreviations to make your block file much more organized. For example, like DL means delink, NU means non-unique, etc. And this just really like helps you like categorize your refutations and make sure that you don't really get confused during the round. Next, you can also tie in framework as responses if you're in LD debate. So like earlier, I brought up the example about like how this point is bad because it doesn't really fall like under structural violence, et cetera, and how we also still went under util. That's an example of tying in framework as responses if you're in an LD debate. Because like overall, sure, you use framework when you do like your final weighing in the last speech for both sides, but also it's good to like kind of reference it and do a bit of like weighing too in your refutation speeches if you can. And also an tip, like good tip in general is just to like time allocation. So spend equal or less amount of time as your opponent on an argument. For example, if they spend like a whole minute talking about a new core scenario, you don't want to just gloss over it in like 5 seconds. You want to at least spend like a substantial amount of time refuting that argument because they have that like warranted out, have good cards, etc. You don't want to gloss over it. But also, if they spend like 5 seconds talking about like an econ disad, you don't want to spend a whole minute responding to it just because you have like a whole bunch of responses prepared for it, like on your block file. You want to like balance your time because generally, like a good rule of thumb in debate is just that like if they spend like 50 seconds on like a point, you should spend 50 seconds or less addressing that point. Okay, next. Internet is allowed now during round if you're in California. So you can always cut cards during prep time if it's like an emergency and you really just don't have anything prepared out for that point. So that's why like being good at using prep time, allocating it correctly can really come in handy. And also if you're going through your rounds and you have like responses to a specific card because you know it's like abusively cut and like a whole school uses that card, for example, like the one that Fiona brought up about how they like miscut inequality leading to nuclear war, you can have like a specific like AT. This specific card is really bad because this, and you like re-highlight the card and explain why like that specific card is bad. So as you're going through rounds like in a tournament and you hit these like abusive cards, you can add them to your block file. And then finally, you can paste in new blocks written in each round to keep on expanding your block file. So like in a round, if you hit like a curveball argument, don't just leave that in that speech doc for the round and like forget about it afterwards. You want to take that specific block and put it in your mastered block file. So in the future rounds, if you like somehow hit that like curveball argument again, you'll have a block response prepared. Okay, finally, let's go over an example of a block. So notice a few things about this unemployment block on the living wage topic for LD. So first, you can reference previous cards from your case. Look at like the top, like number 1. It's a DL or a D-link, so I categorized it. And basically it says that the neg has it backwards and how like higher wages increase productivity, which boosts employment, and how our Hornbeck and Moretti 19 study is better. It analyzes indirect effects, which your studies don't. So notice a few things. First, the Hornbeck and Moretti 19 study was from my case, as you can see from below. So if I've already referenced it and I don't have to like re-quote the entire thing. But second, I give an argument as for why your study is good. And like honestly, in debates, even if your study is like bad, you always say your study is good. Like your study is the best because you want to tell the judges that like um your study is good for like many different reasons, and for that reason your evidence outweighs theirs. And Fiona's laughing right now, but it's true.
Yeah, honestly, low-key just like lie sometimes. Like not actually lie, but just be like, yeah, like for example, like if they're asking you for a methodology and you don't know, you just try to like nuance your way out of it. Like, oh, like they took a study sample and they took this high variable sample and they took it into a consideration with a mass amount of contextualizations from like the current
Yeah, yeah.
like all these things are just say like your study is the best study and you have to like paint it in that narrative.
Yeah, and also like when you're cutting your cards initially, like in your case, you might want to cut it so that like even if the parts like you're not reading out, um, are like underlined. So like for example, maybe like the methodology is still underlined even if you don't read it out. So like if they ask you for a methodology like during cross, you can like quickly scan through it and be like, it says right here in the study that like XYZ happened, right? So you're never like just pushed into a corner and forced to lie because like it's okay to stretch the truth a bit, but it's not okay to lie because you'll get caught out for evidence violation.
Yeah, word. Listen to Nina. I did not say you could lie. I couldn't hear stretch the truth.
Exactly. Hopefully most of you end up in tab. Anyways, um, if you look at my example again, there's like a lot of responses. There's like four, and it's like super long. And like so during a round, I would paste this into my like speech doc. And then if I see that they spend like 20 seconds only talking about unemployment, I'd probably cut out response number four, which is like the entire card to match their timing so I don't like lose time over this argument. And then finally, if you notice on the top, I have headers for organizations. So like 1ER, AT, unemployment. That's just for like this overall block file so I can like actually find the specific block. And then if you want like a full example of how like a full block file is formatted, I have an example of my negation LD block file from the living wage topic linked right here. And the slides will be in the description of the video. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching like this lecture, and I hope this is helpful.
Yeah, really appreciate it, guys. Go check out Nina's block file.
Okay.